Shalom, welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Chabad House of Delmer, together with my co-host Mark Ronich, a statewide news service, and jbiztechvalley.com. We have a very, very special guest with us, Assemblyman Tom Abinanti. Welcome to the Jewish View.
Thank you very much. It's very nice to be here.
Now, Tom, tell me a little bit about the district that you represent, because I know it's like southern Westchester County or something like that. Or?
I represent the Westchester side of the Tappan Zee Bridge. So I have the town of Mount Pleasant, which is just north of the Tappan Zee Bridge. That includes Sleepy Hollow and Pleasantville, and a large area of Mount Pleasant, Valhalla, Hawthorne, places like that. Then I represent south of the Tappan Zee Bridge, which is the town of Greenburgh. And that includes places like Tarrytown, Irvington, Ardsley.
And these are all villages?
They're all villages. And then there's a large part of the unincorporated area called Hartsdale and Fairview. We have more government and more different names than anybody can shake a stick at. But it's a very nice place to live.
Yeah.
It's well governed on the local level. It has very good schools. I'm fortunate to have a very nice community.
But Greenburgh, as a town, is quite large?
Greenburgh has about 90,000 people.
So it's like the city of Albany. It's the size of the city of Albany.
And a little more than half of them live in their own incorporated villages. So they have the town of Greenburgh and the town of Greenburgh government, but some of the services come from their villages of like a Tarrytown.
Is it too much government? Can you consolidate? Can you downsize? Can you streamline?
If I today were to draw a plan of government, I would never do it this way. The problem is it grew from historical roots. In the old days, people lived in the villages, and the farmland was out in the rest of the town. So they elected a mayor and a village board, because that's where they all lived, and they elected a supervisor to be in charge of the farmland and the roads. Then, New York City influence, it got more and more suburban, almost urban, and now all of a sudden the position of supervisor, which was there to fix the roads and supervise the farms, is now a really important position and is like a mayor. You can't change it now because people have chosen a place to live, and there's a real difference between a Dobbs Ferry and an Irvington. From afar, we all look the same. Mm-hmm. But up close, you talk to real estate brokers, they get people who come in and say, I want to live in Irvington. Not Dobbs Ferry, not Tarrytown, I want Irvington. Or I want Tarrytown, not Irvington or Dobbs Ferry.
But could it be an unincorporated village of some sort, like you said?
Could you do away with the villages and just have the town provide the services? Yes, you could. But people have moved to these communities for lots of reasons.
Yeah, but you could still call it, like we have Loudonville,
right.
which is
it's not all about names, though, because there is I've been a public official now for many, many years. I was a town councilman for 6 years. Right. I was a county legislator for 19. I'm now an assemblyman for 4 years. There is a different flavor in each one of these communities. From afar, it doesn't look like much, but there is a different flavor, a different attitude. An example, the Greenburgh Police Department might be very aggressive on certain issues.
Right.
And on the other hand, some other people might be very protective of their own kids. And they might say the Greenburgh Police Department's approach is not the approach that we want. Our police department takes a different approach.
That's the village.
The villages, right. So I was involved in a situation.
Because the villages are set up more like a city when you have a mayor of the village and you have an own police department.
The villages have a better form of government than the towns do, because of the historical situation where this is where the people lived, and the supervisors just took care of the farmland and the roads out there. And so it's kind of strange, but there is a section of the state law which is called a suburban town law. And Greenburgh is a suburban town. They opted in many years ago. So it's more akin to a village form of government, but it's still a supervisor who sits as one member of a town board.
And how long has the supervisor been there?
Our present supervisor,
Paul Feiner?
Paul Feiner, has been there since 1991.
Oh.
He's been there quite some time.
Well, it doesn't seem that long. Maybe to you. But well, 20 years?
Yeah. Yeah, but that's most supervisors, most mayors don't stay around that long. Local government is very underrated and very criticized. It is a tough job.
He must love to be criticized.
Paul is, yes, Paul Feiner is a horse of a different color.
Well, from the readers of our local newspaper up here in Albany, I mean, he does write letters to the editor to our local newspaper. So some of our readership or viewers might have read his.
They know who Paul Feiner is,
They
right?
might know who Paul Feiner
I give him a lot of credit. He is not afraid to advance an idea that may at first look foolish. And Paul has an idea a minute, but every once in a while he comes across a good one. And people ought to pay attention to him and not just dismiss it. And he has shown that he's had a primary, Democratic primary, almost every time. He's a 2-year term.
Okay.
He just has primary after primary after primary. The last time around, he had a strong candidate running against him who had the Democratic Party endorsement against the Democratic supervisor.
Yeah.
Paul won with 70% of the vote. So clearly Paul has...
the power of incumbency.
It's not just the power of incumbency. He's captured the imagination of the people who vote in Democratic primaries.
Okay.
He is a Democrat who tries to put into effect the principles of the Democratic Party. Sometimes he goes a little too far, but he believes in government, and he believes in a government solution. And the people who have moved to Greenburgh, as opposed to the people who live in Mount Pleasant, and there's a real strong dichotomy there. In Greenburgh, the people believe in government. They believe that government is a partner in solving problems. People who live in Mount Pleasant are kind of split. There are many people in Mount Pleasant who would rather government go away, and they would rather be on their own. And I think we're seeing that that's a mirror of society today. Mm-hmm. We have a very strong splitness in this country about the view of government. Right. And so I represent 2 towns with somewhat different views of the role of government.
Now, in the state level, it seems as though the Democrats feel that the governor is too conservative, and the Republicans, some of them say he's singing our song, but others say maybe he's not conservative enough, he's still liberal or moderate. But what's your view on the state government?
Well, let's put it this way. The Republican leader of the Senate, Dean Skelos from Long Island, after the governor gave his State of the State address, said that Cuomo sounds like a moderate Republican. From a strong Democratic point of view, that's not an endorsement. The governor has struck out on his own way. He's not following what you would say would be the traditional Democratic approach.
Well, it sounds like
works
Paul
for
Feiner.
him. Well, yeah, exactly, it does. The governor has been very successful with his approach. I look at it not from, I don't want to condemn the governor or praise the governor. I look at each issue and say, can I support that? Is there some way I can change it to support it? Whatever. I've developed what I guess would be a 3-point test. I define myself as a progressive. I'm not ashamed of that. I'm very strong on that. But what makes me and what makes progressives different than the other side? I think there's 3 principles. One, we believe that everyone should have an opportunity to participate in the great community that we have, whether it be local communities or the state of New York. Secondly, we believe that everyone should contribute according to their means. No special breaks. If you've got something, you should contribute to the community. And thirdly, we believe that government is not the enemy, but government is a partner. Government is the arbiter of how we figure out the first 2. Mm-hmm. And that government has a real role to play in improving our community.
Okay.
And so I judge everything on the basis of, does that work? Education policy. I want to make sure that every kid from the age of 4 to the age of 21 has an opportunity to go to school and do the best that that child can do. And so I look at a policy and say, are we doing the right thing? Frankly, I don't think the state is spending enough money on education right now. We're back to where we were in 2007, 2008. So I am not happy with the direction that the state is going on education.
And that's with more lottery money than ever before.
It may be more money, lottery money, but that lottery money has replaced tax money.
Instead of, not in addition to.
That's correct.
And it originally was written where the lottery money would be in addition to, not instead of.
That was the concept. That's the way it was sold to us. And I think that's a problem.
It is.
Because the most important thing that the most important thing a government can do is keep us safe. That's the first role of government. But the next step, it seems to me, is to take care of young people and vulnerable people. We've got to make sure that we're providing our kids the best opportunity they can. If they blow it, well, then they blew it. But we have an obligation as a community to say, we're going to help our kids, we're going to set them off in the right direction. We're going to give them some ethical principles, and we're going to give them the tools. You know, whatever ethical principles you want, whether it's Jewish, Catholic, Protestant, or none at all. But you want to set them off in the right direction and say, these are the right things to do. And here's the tools that you need to succeed in our community. The second aspect is, okay, you were blessed with the ability to make some money and to succeed. So you've got to give back. You've got to give back to the community. And I don't think tax breaks solve all the problems. If you were given a lot, you've gotten that because of our community. Just look around the world at all of the totalitarian societies that do not allow individual people to succeed. We foster individualism. But you have an obligation with that. You've got to give back, you've got to invest in the community, so there'll be people following you and everybody else can live at a reasonably good level. We have, and the numbers are staggering. I mean, the inequality in New York State right now, I think New York State is shown to be the most unequal state in the country.
Well, it's a microcosm of the entire country, too.
Exactly. But people at the top have more and more and more, and people in the middle no longer are in the middle, they're now part of the bottom. I mean, if you look at the numbers, it's just staggering.
It's in the middle. Yeah.
And so I have a real problem with policy that is built on trying to encourage the private sector to do things that government should be doing.
So I have a feeling, based on what you're saying, is that you believe state government is not liberal enough.
I don't want to use it in terms of liberal and conservative. I think that state government is not living up to the role of allowing people to step in where they should be able to move forward. For example, we're laying off so many public employees. Those are good middle-class jobs. And then we're giving tax breaks. It was just announced that IBM is going to get a $55 million tax break, and they've promised to provide 750 jobs. Are my numbers right? That's like $70,000 a job? I would take that $70,000 and I'd put it into fixing bridges and roads and schools and doing things like that and say, IBM, we appreciate you. We're not chasing you out of here. We'll do anything we can to help you, but we're not going to pay you to produce a job. You're going to make money.
Well, someone said that Jimmy Fallon's Tonight Show was going to come to New York anyway, but we still gave them tax breaks.
Exactly. That's the point. You know, New York is a great place to live, and we constantly hear people are moving because of the taxes. I don't think that's really true. People complain about the taxes, but if they're going to move no matter what the taxes are.
Tom Golisano set that tone. When he moved to Florida, he moved out of Pittsburgh.
But Tom Golisano could have moved anywhere. He could have moved to Paris. I mean, he's got enough money, it doesn't matter. A lot of the people move south because of the weather. And then when they get there, many of them come back here.
They don't like the weather that they see.
Family situation.
Right.
My aunt and uncle many years ago moved to Florida. My cousins are living in Florida. Their kids are all moving back to New York because they see this is the place to be.
Right.
This is the place. This is an exciting place. It's a great place to live. And part of it is because we have created an environment, and it takes money to do that.
Right.
IBM is not going to create that environment. And so many, I worked for IBM once as a college student, okay? It's a great company. But it's not going to create that environment in the community that we all need. And it's not going to, you know, Greenburgh is a great example of it, where there's parks, the roads are well kept, there are all kinds of programs for people. It's a real community. If you want to participate with your neighbors, there's a way to do it. And personally, I think that's what life is all about. It's a community. Some people go to churches, some people go to synagogues.
You say that Westchester is the highest tax. I mean, I
high
don't have a
tax
position, so I'm not arguing
That's a
for
very
or
valid
against
question.
anything. But just these are the things that I've heard. You know, and people are more leaving New York. The Southern Belt is growing in population in New York. Either it's stagnant or it's losing, so something's happening.
But there's a spirit of tolerance in New York. There's a spirit of excitement in New York. There's a spirit of innovation in New York. You don't find all of that in other parts of the country. Plus, the tax issue is a very valid issue. But I believe there's two reasons why Westchester is so high taxed. Number one is the state government and the federal government have shed responsibilities. As I said, in education, the state is now paying less money to schools around the state than we did in 2007 and 2008. In a place like Westchester, the residents are not willing to accept less, so they pay more out of their own pockets. They said, we want the best schools in the country, and I believe we have them, but it costs money. And so they've reached into their own pockets, and they're paying in property taxes. Secondly, it's a very high-cost area. The cost of living in Westchester County is like 147% of the national average. Higher than Manhattan, which is only like 138%.
Because of the real estate, because of why?
Because
Cost of living.
we're a
Well,
victim of our own success.
Yeah.
It's a place that people want to live, and when people make money in New York City, they move to Westchester County. And so there's a high competition for the valuable places, and we're a victim of our own success. It's a good place to live.
I remember an assemblyman from Westchester telling me that he was earning the least amount of money of anyone in his area, in his
Right.
block, in his neighborhood. And he knew all the people in his neighborhood. He went around and he's been talking to people. But the $79,000 or $80,000
Yeah, $79,500, right.
That plus whatever you get for committee chairs and all that. But it was still less. You got to earn six figures, at least six figures, in order to get ahead and survive.
Well, even
with
to
a
just to
good
pay the
family.
taxes and to pay,
Right. So in Westchester County, that's what it takes.
people don't recognize how the cost of living multiplies. I drive up here to get my gasoline. Well, I leave an empty tank until I get to Albany because it's 20 cents difference. Now, 20 cents doesn't sound like much, but that's 20 cents for the milkman, that's 20 cents for the oil man, that's 20 every one of those guys has got to charge more for their product because they're paying more for gasoline, and they're paying more to heat their plants. And we're next to New York City, so the price of everything is very expensive. And that just multiplies and multiplies and multiplies, and it makes Westchester a very expensive place to live. You can hire a teacher in Albany County maybe for $35,000. That same teacher is going to cost us $60,000 or $65,000 in Westchester. There was a superintendent, very good superintendent, who lives in who's a superintendent of schools in one of my districts. She couldn't afford to live in her own school district. She came from upstate New York, where she said she had a $250,000 mansion.
Beautiful house.
And in Westchester County, for
Buy a
$250,000, exactly.
Get the
There
garage.
are condemned houses in Mount Vernon for $250,000. But that's the problem we face.
Yeah.
And so if you want the best superintendents and the best, even janitors, if you want policemen who are going to be able to live, if not in their community, at least near the community.
So let me interject here because we're tight on time. Part of the community is education. How do you feel about the Common Core?
I'm torn about the Common Core. I understand the concept of
common?
I understand the concept that everybody in the country should get the same basic education. The problem is that once you get beyond those standards, now you've got to get to a curriculum, and then you have to get to a day-to-day lesson plan. The way the Board of Regents rolled this out, whether it was their fault or the fault of the schools who didn't anticipate it, and the Board of Regents didn't enforce, they get ready for this, what's happened is it was sprung on everybody.
But you say your superintendents in Westchester weren't even consulted.
They were not consulted on how to roll this out at all. We've had this conversation.
And that's missed. That's a missed opportunity.
I believe that the state education department blew this totally. But the question of Common Core, I talked to some school districts. It's a major improvement over what they had before. I talked to some people in New York City. It's just not working the way it is, so Common Core raises the level. But when you come into some schools in Westchester County, They thought that having to prepare for Regents exams was diminishing their standards. Advanced placement was diminishing their standards. Algebra, which is a Common Core subject in high school, was being taught in the 8th grade in many of our schools. So they're way ahead, and they're producing people who think. They're producing people who are imaginative. You know, if Common Core is taking a measuring device and saying, and asks you questions about, well, how would you measure the temperature on the basis of this? Because that's the standard device that most of the schools are using to measure the temperature of water. Well, in a Scarsdale or in a Pleasantville or in Irvington, they've got the fanciest, newest devices that science can devise. They're not going to learn how to use this device, and they're probably going to fail those questions because they're going to say, you know, it's kind of like when they first invented calculators, we were using slide rules, okay? If your tests were based on slide rules, those kids that learned how to use calculators were not going to know how to answer the question on slide rules. And so it's the same problem today. There are many people who think that Common Core is bringing them back down. So I believe that the concept of Common Core is good. And even developing some kind of a curriculum based on Common Core is good. But since it was sprung on everybody, all of the teachers are in a panic. They're taking the materials that are being produced just now, they should have been produced 2 years ago, on the day-to-day plans, the classroom plans, and they're spoon-feeding it to their students because they don't know what the exam's going to look like, and they don't know how to teach this on their own because they have yet to be trained on it.
So should the Common Core be tied to teacher evaluations and a teacher's success?
I do not believe that that's a good way to judge teachers on how well their kids do on exams. I think that that's the role of the administrators and the principals and the superintendents, because there are so many kids who learn differently.
Yeah, sure.
And especially when you get the special needs kids.
Yeah, I know, in inner city compared to the,
Exactly.
to, like you say, suburban motivated parents. It just isn't fair for the teachers.
Exactly. It's not fair for the teachers, but I'm even looking at this from the point of view of the kids. If a teacher discovers this, let me give you a good example of this. You have a lot of kids with special needs.
Right.
And they might eventually be able to catch up, but they need the teacher's attention. And you have a lot of kids who are 8th grade level, 4th, 5th grade reading level. How could you throw them into an algebra class and say, okay, you've got, well, they're not fitted for the algebra class, but you're going to judge the teacher on whether that kid does well in an algebra class? That doesn't make any sense.
It was an Orthodox Jewish person, but he taught in the New York City public schools. And I actually asked him that question that, you know, the cities, people saying, it was like an article, the New York City schools aren't doing so well. So, you know, I pinned it to him. He says, you know, what am I supposed to do? He says, I bring in kids, they go to Honduras or South America for 2 years, they come back. So you got these foreign kids. Yeah, that's what I'm saying, just to paintbrush everybody equally.
Exactly.
You're going to get foreign kids that just came into school. They can't even speak English straight. So how you know, oh, well, you don't know how to take a good English exam.
A good teacher will be able to deal with a classroom of diverse kids and make each one of them advance. Common Core doesn't measure that.
I got to ask you, I got 2 more education type questions and quick answers, as quick as you can. The income earned tax credit?
I originally considered...
Explain what that is for the viewers.
Well, I thought Tom was going to do that.
All right, so you explain the basic
there
idea
is a
what it
proposal that would give anyone who makes a contribution to an educational institution a tax credit. We're not talking about a tax deduction,
Right.
which is what you can get today. We're talking about a one-for-one, a dollar-for-dollar tax credit. It's the bottom line. It's basically a voucher, in effect. Because if I make a $1,000 contribution to my local school, Pleasantville School District, I can write that off. If I make that same contribution to Sacred Heart Academy, I can write that off.
That's a deduction.
Today it's a deduction,
right.
and it's
how is it
balanced
credited?
against your, it's one of your deductions on your tax return. This would make it a tax credit, so it's the bottom line. So that if I owe $2,000 to the state on taxes, I can wipe that out with a $2,000 contribution to Sacred Heart. If I take it as a contribution, as a deduction,
Right.
it balances. It goes into that that list of deductions,
Yeah.
and there's a limit on how much you can take on deductions,
Right.
and so it's not a dollar for dollar. It might be 30% or whatever. The problem with the proposal as it's drafted is that, number one, it says half of the money, up to $500 million, I'm sorry, $250 million was the limit, would go to private schools and half would go to public schools. Well, half and half, there's 40,000 private school students in the state, 2.1 million, 2.3 million public school students in the state. So if you are concerned about the public schools, as it's my job to be, because I'm a state official, that's not a fair balance. Secondly, I'm abdicating my responsibility to spend state money to the taxpayer, because the taxpayer is now figuring out how to pay
Less on their taxes.
less on their taxes and where to direct the money.
Right.
While on the other hand, that's my job as a state official. We should be collecting the taxes and then allocating them out fairly. Here we're allowing the taxpayer to, in effect, direct his tax monies somewhere else. And there's no limit. So that means some out-of-state corporation, you know, the famous Koch brothers,
Yeah.
they call themselves the
Koch
Koch brothers,
yeah.
but in New York they're the Koch brothers. What if they decide to come in and spend $30,000, $40,000 to some school that teaches things that we don't agree with?
Okay.
To some school that is totally intolerant and doesn't believe in whatever, and now we're going to give them a tax credit,
Right.
dollar for dollar? We're in effect spending state money that way. How do I justify that?
Okay.
I just can't justify that.
Okay.
I understand the needs of the private schools, particularly the parochial schools.
Right.
I went through Catholic schools myself
Right.
my entire life, but I look at it and say my parents scrimped and saved to put me through those schools because that's what they wanted. I had the alternative of a public education. We decided not to do that. And I had a very good education.
Yeah, I see, obviously.
Thank
You're
you.
well-spoken.
But my parents paid for it, and I think that's an important part of this,
Okay.
because it's choice. Our obligation as a state is to make sure that every child has the opportunity for a free education.
So now special needs is a very special cause for you in the Assembly. Why
Yes.
is that?
Well, first of all, I have a child with autism, so I'm fully into the system and understand the good and the bad parts of it. But I've always had a concern for people who needed somebody else to speak for them. And unfortunately, it appears that we're forgetting the vulnerable people. It should not be solely the job of churches, synagogues, and other not-for-profits to take care of people who need additional help. That should be the role of government. And I think that we're going in the wrong direction. Right now, we're more concerned about tax breaks than we are people. And I think we have to turn that around. I think we have to redirect government. You know, if there's one thing you learn when you've had a religious upbringing, no matter how religious you are.
Or which religion, right?
Exactly. It doesn't matter which one. You learn that there's something more important than money, and you learn that there's something more important than being at the top of the social spectrum. You understand, you learn a respect for other people. Mm-hmm. And if there's anything that we should take from the various religions, it should be instilling government with that fervor to say, we're here, we are our brother's keeper. We are here to help everyone, especially the people who can't help themselves.
And the corrupt elected officials who get thrown out of office don't feel the way you do, and we're seeing that more and more. But that's a
well,
conversation.
unfortunately, you're not in this business
Right.
to help yourself. You're in this business to help
Right.
other people.
So let me ask you quickly, you're chair of a subcommittee on election day operations and voter disenfranchisement.
I'm an election lawyer. I'm an attorney. I've practiced law.
I never knew that subcommittee existed.
I didn't either until I was appointed to chair it. It's a fancy title. I think the object of that subcommittee is to peel away some of the work from the election law committee
There's not that
And-
much work for the election.
Oh, there's lots of work for the election law committee if you want to do it right. If you want to do it right.
Well, I haven't seen that happen yet.
And I think there's two purposes to this. One is to look at what's happening on Election Day and make sure it works.
Yeah.
And secondly, to look and see how do we correct the problems that disenfranchise people. Now, I may have a different view of that than some others, but I'm looking at this and saying we systematically disenfranchise people. And we don't understand that. I mean, I look at some of the voting machines that we have. And, you know, the instruction, it's simple stuff. I walked into a polling place not long ago, and there was an argument between a woman and the inspector, and she said, but I want to vote this way. And he said, you can't do that. It's not allowed to do that. She said, look at the instructions. And I looked at the instructions. She was right. It said vote for any two, so she checked off 2 boxes. It happened to be the same person twice. It wasn't clear to that woman from the instructions that you can't vote for the same person twice. There were 5 people running for 2 spots. You have to vote for 2 different people or just cast 1 vote. So she was disenfranchised because her ballot was being torn up because she voted for the same. That's a very little simple example.
No, but I'm glad that you shared that with us. I really am, because there are probably there's a
lot of examples like that.
So how many times have your subcommittee met this session?
We have not met because I'm the only member of it so far.
Oh, you are?
No, I actually have one other colleague who we've discussed. We are working informally on a series of improvements to things like this.
So I'm wondering, is it a Republican?
No, it's a Democrat.
There's
Barbara Lifton from
Ithaca.
From
so
Ithaca.
there's no Republican.
I guess no Republican was
cares.
interested
Okay.
in joining us.
I think we're going to leave it at that because I think we're running out of time.
That's
so.
it, out of time. It's been too good of a time.
Well, I
Time flies
very
when
much
you're having a good
appreciate the
time.
conversation.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, he
Thank
gives
you.
you a blessing.
Give a
Thank
blessing, Assemblyman, that you're young at heart and you have a lot of things going and you care about the people of New York, and we should continue to help the people of New York with good health.
Thank you. Thank
Okay,
you.
Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.